And we are live. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited, super happy to have Paul Bannister, the Chief Strategy Officer of CafeMedia, today on the webcast, and Tom Kershaw, CTO of Rubicon. Morning, guys.
Morning. Afternoon.
Great to have you here. Yeah, so Tom's in California, so it's pretty early for you. Paul's in New York, is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Both very sunny. I'm cheating because I've got my desk lamp here. It's actually not sunny at all here. It's been raining all day. But yeah, great to have you guys here. We're seeing the number of attendees going up, which is great. We have a lot of people who've registered today. So we're going to give it a few seconds. I'm just calling out to my team, making sure everything's fine. Seems to be all right. Yeah, so I mean, great to have you guys on the webcast. We've been doing this for a few weeks now. Helps us keep in touch with real people, either even though with the prism of the screen. But yeah, I guess first questions. How you doing? How's it going for you? Working from home it's a new thing. I understand. We just talked about it. How's that working out?
It's it's gone pretty good for me. I think it was a little rough at the beginning. We have the benefit as a company that about 2/3 of our team works from home. So while I work in the office most of the time, I'm pretty well set up, and we're very Zoom and Slack oriented. So it's a pretty easy transition. It's more like the other bits and pieces. Like I'm still sitting on a kitchen table chair. I have a new office chair that's downstairs and needs to be assembled. So I think that's probably the final piece of getting fully set up here. So
yeah, it looks like it's going to be more than just a few weeks, huh? So you better make it comfortable.
Exactly.
Tommy, are you set up all right?
Yeah, everything's going good. It's hard, I think, for engineering teams, especially distributed ones, to not work together closely. But I think we're getting used to it, and everything's going fine. And thanks a lot, Matthew, for setting these up. These have really turned into kind of a fun thing to keep in touch with everybody. So, kudos.
Yeah. My pleasure. It's great to have you guys. So I guess maybe just to kick things off and have a bit of a understanding of how you're going through this phase. I mean, we've heard a lot of things about investment going down. So I'm guessing, I mean, you've been probably impacted. Paul, what can you tell us about how things have been going for the past few weeks, and what's the outlook for you for the coming weeks? Are you seeing the beginning of a recovery, or where are we right now?
Yeah, I think the big dip started happening kind of mid-March. Is when things started heading down from a CPM perspective. April 1 was a big drop. It was less bad than we feared, which is small silver lining. April pretty flat, but May has been late April and May so far have been some positive trends on the CPM front, which has been good. We've had the benefit that across all of our publishers, while CPMs have been down, traffic's been significantly up. So for us and for many of the publishers we work with, kind of total revenue is not too far off, which is a good thing. So many of our sites are kind of food and home and parenting and categories like that are seeing massive amounts of traffic spikes. So the balance has been okay at a high level, but now that we're seeing CPMs move in the right direction, that's kind of positive. And big question marks around as lockdowns end and people start a little bit going back to something more like normal life. Does the traffic spike remain? Are people spending more time on these content categories that are driving a lot of consumption right now?
Yeah, and probably less impacted as well by, we had Steph Laser from News Corp a couple of weeks ago, and she was saying that there's a lot of keyword blocking related to exogenous terms. You're probably less impacted than most in that category, right? Because your verticals are less
impacted, although in some cases still impacted. There's a ton of content out there about making sourdough bread during coronavirus, or homeschooling during coronavirus. And so we've worked with our publishers to educate them on how can you get the maximum traffic, because people are searching for those things on Google and Pinterest and other places. How do you get the traffic? But how do you do it in a way that doesn't impact the ad blocking? So it's certainly not affected us as much as News Corp or somebody like that, but definitely something we have to kind of keep our eye on.
It could not be named. Is that I mean, increase in traffic, decrease in value. That must be a huge problem for you on the technical costs front, right, Tom?
I wouldn't say a huge problem, but it certainly is the big news of the past 2 months is the huge increases in volumes. You know, across the board, most exchanges and DSPs have seen 20 to 25% increase in the volume of transactions, almost all due to more eyeballs on screen. And you know, CPMs have not come up as a to go along with that. So as a result, there is some cost pressure on the industry. The good news is it looks like it's kind of leveled off from a just volume of ad request perspective. The other thing that I would note is that it seems like open market was more protected than some of the deals and more premium deals, because those require human touch. That was kind of disrupted a bit for a few weeks, and I think those things are coming back as well. So you know, we're starting to see more PMP activity. But you know, I think the big news is managing the volumes, and you're seeing all kinds of reactions to ways to manage those volumes, from filtering to QPS allocations, and some of the things that we had 5 years ago that kind of went away are kind of reappearing. So you're being able to intelligently manage large volumes of transactions is one of the big headlines. But I think it's good overall that more eyes are on screens, especially on CTV screens and those types of things now, because those behaviors tend to persist.
There was an announcement from Trade Desk a few weeks ago saying that they were going to kind of impose more restrictions on like SPO, reduce the duplication. Do you think it's related to COVID, or is it just a general trend?
I don't know too much about that.
Yeah, I think we've all talked about that a lot. I think that was something that they were planning on doing over the longer term anyway, and this sort of accelerated their activity. Tom, you probably have even more comments around that than I do.
Yeah, I think this is a general trend that goes well beyond Trade Desk, which is kind of correcting for some of the excesses of the header bidding regime that started 4 or 5 years ago. And there is a lot of, we are in an efficiency drive due to some of the things that have been happening that we talked about at the beginning of the talk here. There is a lot of transaction volume that we're all dealing with, and there's a lot of inefficiencies in our industry where the same impression is bopping around lots of times. And so I think buyers are starting to demand a little more rationality there, and they want publishers and exchanges to make choices. And I think deduplication is just starting. It started with sellers JSON and supply chain object. Now we're starting to move into new mechanisms. One of the big pushes is going to be, how do you identify an impression in a unique way? I expect some activity in the IAB and other forums around how you do that, because today there really is no effective way to deduplicate inventory, because you really don't know that an impression is duplicative. So I think I expect some standards work in 2020 to deal with that issue. But this is an overall trend. I mean, and this is where most industries, they do go, and there's pendulum swings, and the pendulum swing we have now is towards efficiency. And I think that's not, I don't view that as all bad. In fact, I don't view it as bad at all. I view it as pretty good.
Yeah, especially when you
screw it up and do it horribly, then who knows? Jury's out on how we do it, but directionally and philosophically, it's fine. It's the tactics and the implementation where we sometimes screw things up in our beloved ad tech industry.
Yeah. I wanted to just mention this because there was a poll earlier today from Twitter famous and otherwise famous as well, Ari Papara. It was relating this to the adoption of pre-bid and the potential kind of positive impact it could have on pre-bid, which could be the favorite platform for SSPs to kind of route inventory to Trade Desk. Have you seen this? Because I mean, you're chairman of pre-bid, right? At CafeMedia, you're a big supporter, a big operator of pre-bid header bidding wrapper. Can you make any connections with this? Can you support this hypothesis, or is it too early for that?
Yeah, I think it's not too early. I think we can say with some certainty that pre-bid has emerged as the preferred integration option for most publishers, because they have control over it. They're not locked into a single vendor. It's not a black box. They can change it however they want. And if they want a fully managed version, they can get it. If they want to just totally run their own and tell everyone to leave me alone, they can do that too. So all of the options are there. I will say, if I was honest, that I'm a little surprised at how well pre-bid is doing. In that 3 years ago,
maybe a bit too honest.
I mean, I'm very pleasantly surprised that it has come so far in such a short amount of time, and there's so much going on in terms of, we're not talking about ways to just trick the ad server into taking our bids anymore. We're not talking about very sophisticated things like how to do programmatic guaranteed with pacing and capping, and how to build forecasting tools and all these other things that we're actively working on in pre-bid today. So the idea 3 years ago when we started this thing that that pre-bid would be a rival to Google EB and that would win, it's just kind of not even, we didn't think about that that wasn't an objective at the time. Now it is. And now we continue to do really cool things with the pre-bid, but it's a testament to the power of the publisher community to come together and actually say, this is what we're doing. And it's just the beginning, by the way. We have even more we can be doing in areas such as identity that I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah, I remember some of those slides that you presented about the 2020 roadmap. That was pretty scary. What's the is this something you discuss with publishers, Paul, when you talk about CafeMedia and what you guys do? Is the values that are behind pre-bid around the transparency and the control? Is this something that comes into play, or
we talk about it a little bit, but with our publishers, we really function as a managed service, but like even deeper than that, like they work with us, but they don't want to deal with it at all. So while we certainly talk about the fact that pre-bid is an important part of our stack and how we do things, and we're heavily invested in pre-bid, we have kind of a publisher board seat on the pre-bid board is from somebody on our team. It's not a big part of what we do, and because our publishers want to focus on content creation and not really get in the weeds of how the money is actually made.
Okay, makes sense. Right, you started addressing this. I mean, obviously, I guess identity was the crisis before the crisis. Now we have two crises to deal with, but still pretty much let's say a challenge, not necessarily a crisis. But we have a window of activity with third-party cookies, which is going to close very soon. This is the underlying foundation of everything we do, and that makes digital advertising valuable for brands. So pre-bid has had a really important role to play in the identity space. We've seen as ID5 building modules and distributing cookieless IDs through pre-bid, massive adoption on this. I guess I'm interested in understanding maybe from your standpoint, Paul, first, how do you see kind of this technology playing a role, and how much kind of else other things do you do from an identity standpoint to prepare for a cookieless future? Yeah,
I mean, pre-bid is certainly one of the key kind of cruxes of all of this, because whatever the solutions end up being, and I think there probably will be multiple solutions we're talking about here, pre-bid is the platform through pretty much all of it will flow. I mean, Google will have its ecosystem that will be separate to some level, and that that's not going anywhere. But for everything else, pre-bid is going to be that point that things are flowing through. So I think that it's critical that whatever pieces of the solution to the death of the cookie we all come up with, like pre-bid's going to be a huge part of supporting that. So that's really good. I do think we'll probably talk about this more, but I think there's multiple pieces here. There's IDs and things like ID5 and platforms like that are about like, how do we identify people better? There are things like the privacy sandbox with differential privacy and federated learning that are going to be taking a totally different approach, and they can be part of the solution. There's going to be things like, I think, a continued rise in contextual targeting and other targeting types like that don't need any of this infrastructure. So there's kind of a lot of different paths that we're going down and trying to figure out, what are the winners going to be, and where do we place our bets about what the world will look like 2 years from now.
Yeah, what would you say, Tom, that you're aligned with this?
Yeah, I think pre-bid has done about 10% of what it needs to do so far. So we're early on. And the one contribution pre-bid has made to the identity debate is that we put control in the hands of the publisher. That's the most important thing. They used to be the way IDs were placed. Publishers had no control over what, in the third-party cookie space, you could put an ID on a publisher site without any real publisher buy into that, and as a result,
without publishers knowing it
on pages, users are going to their browsers and like, who the heck is this person or this company I never heard of? And there was no rhyme or reason to it. So the first thing we did in pre-bid is like, nothing goes on the page once the publisher controls it. As the third-party cookies go away, everything will gate through the pre-bid wrapper, and the publisher has the power to say, I want this ID on, I want this ID off. That seems like a really small thing, but it's the first step of really moving to a controlled environment here. So I guess I would say pre-bid has just started the work it needs to do, but the module is a very, very important first step because it's a first party right. So we're giving the publishers the ability to write to the first party, to persist an ID, and then select the IDs it wants transmitted upstream to the rest of the ad ecosystem. And the next stage is making that scalable, making that secure, making that deterministic as well as probabilistic, all of those types of things. But I think the first and foremost step around this thing is the identity is controlled by the publisher because they're the ones that has the relationship to the user, and they're the ones who can guarantee consent and customization that the user wants.
Yeah, and also like in the future, they are the only one who can decide to store this ID locally because they are the first party, right?
Yep.
And so as a third party in the future,
there's a lot of work around first party, making the first party model scale. And that's, I think, we should all acknowledge that we've got, 80% of the work is ahead of us on that, not behind us. It's exciting and fun stuff, and we're going to rewrite kind of the script on how this is done. But the first party model is really something we should all be thinking about. Like, how do you do it? How do you secure it? How do you get the right level of consent? How do you give users control? Those are all very interesting questions we'll be diving into in the coming months.
Yeah. Totally agree. I just wanted to share. There was an article earlier, I think earlier this week or last week, in which you might have seen this chart, which is kind of the adoption of ID modules in pre-bid. So basically, bid adapters turning on support for one of the ID modules that are available in pre-bid. I think the other chart that didn't make it to the article by Ronan, but that's also interesting, is how quickly those, or how recently those ID modules have been supported by bid adapters, and how that trend has accelerated, right? And I think we're about to pull the data from April. I think it's kind of clearly in that direction. So we've seen a massive kind of level of adoption for ID solution, and it's not just ID5, obviously, it's all of them. And we've seen that pre-bid has been a very big kind of supporter of distribution of those solutions with publishers, obviously, but also with bid adapters. Maybe one question. So to all the attendees, there's a chat box on the right-hand side. I think if you have questions, feel free to do so. Maybe one question with your Rubicon hat on. One of the people on the line was asking what kind of implementation is required by exchanges or SSPs. Can you tell us a bit how you've kind of approached this, and what does it mean for you to basically support external IDs as an exchange, as an SSP?
Well, we have to read the ID, and then we have to pass it through to either all buyers, or in some cases we have to map that, or just determine who to pass it through to, because not all IDs are, the ID5 ID, you can send to any buyer. Some IDs you require a buyer subscription or some type of thing that you have to do. So it's really not a lot of work for the SSP, but we just have to read the value we get from the ad request or from the wrapper, and determine who to send that to. And then the real work is the buyer has to key on it and read it and use it in their bidding algorithms. So working with buyers to help them use these IDs has been a big thing. And the big issue is scale. I mean, we need to get to scale, and we talk about this a lot. That the current regime, the third-party cookie regime, has a lot of issues with it. A lot of things we don't think are super great, but scale isn't one of its problems. It scales really well, and it gets to coverage in the 90% range of users you see pretty quickly, whereas in first-party models, it takes a lot longer. So I think one of the challenges we face as an SSP is how to get to the level of scale that you can buy on, because it's really hard to buy on a 5% match rate. It's really hard to buy on a 15% match rate. So that's what we kind of been focused on, is finding ways to surface IDs in ways that allow buyers to buy.
Yeah. Plus, back to your point earlier, Paul, right? It's not a one size fits all. There's going to be multiple solutions. There's going to be multiple approaches. There's already like maybe around a dozen ID modules in pre-bid, and there will probably a few more. And then you'll have the cohort, type of approach. So it will be a multi-ID world in which we will have to live, versus a single ID world today, because everybody has access to its own ID basically. So like it's easy. You just have to key off of a Rubicon ID or a Trade Desk ID or a Beeswax ID or a MediaMath ID, right? So that's the evolution we have to prepare for. And so obviously the strategies from a publisher standpoint, but also from a buyer standpoint, will have to be multi-ID strategies.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's also an interesting time because there's going to be multiple IDs, and there's going to be, I don't say winners and losers. There's going to be winners here for sure. And it's like figuring out what are the IDs that are out there now, what are the ones that are coming, what are the solutions that are coming down the road. And as we adopt them, measuring how are they doing, what's going on, knowing that today there's not really a ton of volume behind buyers or on the supply side either in terms of, you know, really adopting these things. But it's like we have to be there because we have to see as these things start coming online and more buyers, you know, do start activating on IDs that you know, publishers and SSPs and DSPs and everybody kind of in between are ready to, you know, to be there to activate when that's happening.
Yeah. Yeah,
I think it's one of the big challenges that is exactly what Paul just mentioned is that, you know, today we still have third-party cookies and we're going to have them through 2020. So when you're trying in 2021, so while you're trying to get them, hey, you need to work on, you need to use ID5. It's this persistent identifier. It's going to scale forever. And they're like, you know, call me on, you know, December 31st of 2021, the day before it's going to go away. And then I'll start working on it. Convincing people to proactively solve problems that don't yet exist is always a challenge in our industry. That's why it's funny when you join these W3C meetings and these privacy sandbox meetings and, you know, they're talking about stuff that is so not ready for anything real yet. It's just hard to kind of get real cohesion around those ideas because they're just so early in the process.
Yeah, it's early, but at the same time, it's only a 12 to 18 months transition, and it's not something that you can be compliant on your own with. It's, you know, it's an ecosystem play.
It's just hard to convince. You know, it's always like, hey, I'm gonna have one more beer. I'll worry about this. No, that's just the way we all work. Right?
Yeah,
we were actually, so we have systems built into pre-bid. We have a system we call header bidder holdout that measures the incrementality of header bidders. We've been using that for years now to understand how each exchange is contributing to our stack and true incrementality. We built a system now called identity module holdout, and that is holding out our ID modules as we spawn them so we can see what the incrementality is. And, you know, I actually saw some data this morning of the 5 we currently have running, only 1 is incremental. And that's kind of, I was actually surprised even 1 was, because I felt that like we're not there yet. But I think if you're a publisher and you have a similar system on your side and you say, these are not adding value, you're going to turn them off, even though like this is playing the long game. Like you have to be there because what's happening 6 months from now, 12 months from now, 18 months from now is going to be different. And today it's just not there yet. So I think people are not, to Tom's point, like not used to that, like longer term thinking about what we need to do.
Yeah. And how do you compete with a 90% penetration ID that every buyer already buys on, and all their bidders are keyed into it, and it just works? I mean, it's just hard to get people's attention to the severity of the problem. And it gets particularly interesting when we start talking about our IDFAs going away and our additives on mobile devices going away, and, you know, people's heads explode. They're like, no one wants to deal with any of that stuff. But we are in an existential moment, and we are moving towards a new internet. And you can get on the train for that new internet, or you can just, you know, sit by the side of the road and not get on the train. But I highly advise you to start thinking about this future, because we are building something, and we can actually build something cool. We can, for once, do something that's positive for the world in advertising by making an ad experience that's not super sucky.
Yeah, and I mean you know, you were talking about winners and losers earlier, Paul. The clear winners of the new identity world are publishers, right? Because like you were saying earlier, right, the level of access that vendors have today without requiring publisher consent, the issues around bid listening, around data leakage, the issues around privacy compliance in some countries or some regions. I mean, all those issues are massive for publishers, and they go away with third-party cookies. The problem is that a lot of the value that we're transacting on today also goes away. And so we have to find a way to replace the value without recreating the problems.
Yeah, I think
that's really the challenge. Yeah,
that's the critical question, because winner is a funny word. I think the publisher is certainly winning control here, which is good. But I'm not convinced yet that the publisher is winning, you know, the revenue game here. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of existing systems and processes and approaches built on the infrastructure of third-party cookies. And, you know, will advertisers, when they go away, continue buying on the open web, and you know, IDFA and mobile IDs go away on the app ecosystem? Will advertisers keep buying there, or will they just move more of their money into walled gardens? And that is a big question that is not there's not a clear answer to that right now. And I'm optimistic, but like that, that doesn't get you that far by itself.
You don't want your victory trophy yet, Paul? I was going to have it delivered over to you like later.
Yeah, exactly. We won. We got rid of third-party cookies, then we all went out of business.
Yeah, we're working on it. We're working on it. Actually, back to the value element. Right now, what we're seeing and what we're pitching to buyers is simple quote unquote use cases like retargeting on Safari, right? And we believe that there's performance benefits for the brand, and there should be performance benefit for the publisher as well, because if you're able to buy, at a even slightly higher price on Safari, given the level of CPMs that we see today, which is about half of what we see on Chrome, roughly.
Yeah, roughly.
There's untapped value there if we can do some of the things we do in Chrome in Safari, because inventory is cheaper, so it's easier to show uplift. Plus, it's untapped audience from a brand standpoint.
Yeah, I mean, it's people. When you talk about the difference in CPMs between Safari and Chrome, people always like raise their fists kind of angrily and say, iPhone users are more affluent and are spending more money and they're better customers. Like, why wouldn't you be spending your money there as an advertiser? And that's true. Like, if there was a magazine that had a super high-end audience and advertisers weren't buying it, like that's a huge opportunity. But it's what's happening with the web right now, where advertisers just aren't there because they want the tracking.
You can't measure. You can't measure.
Yeah.
You can't target. You can't control.
Exactly.
You can't do anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And that's the perspective. Like, when I'm always a bit worried when I hear people saying, "Oh, but that's fine. Are we going to go back to the good old days of context and my media brand and forget about all this mess and context is everything." No, it is not, because on the other side, you've got Google and Facebook, where you can do one-to-one targeting at scale, measure, et cetera, which has plenty of its own faults, but at least the basics are there. And it's going to be impossible for brands to come back on this. I see you don't agree with that, Tom.
Well, I mean, to some extent, that you're describing me in terms of saying, one of the delicate things we have to walk here is how much in this new regime, how much we want things to be the exact same. Right. And so part of it is figuring out, right, there's going to be a new model and we're going to have to go towards that new model. And what I hear everyone saying a lot of times is we have to make this work. We have to make that work. We're going to take away the foundation of the entire ecosystem for 10 years. But we're somehow going to try to do the exact same things we did before. And I don't think that's going to work. I think you're going to have two types of users. You're going to have the default experience for internet users is going to be fully anonymous. There is going to be no user ID whatsoever. And you're going to have to deal with group-based conversion tracking and group-based attribution, and the traditional targeting methods that we're using today will probably go away. And you know what? Good riddance. Then there will be another set of opted-in users where users choose to provide information so that they can have a better ad experience. So that will be entirely gated by and controlled by the publisher. So I think you're going to have both. And to some extent, I mean, I get a little bit leery of saying, how do we make retargeting work on Safari? And how do we make this work or that work? Simply because I tell you, I have heard so many cockamamie schemes about how to make IDs work on Safari, some of which involve snake oil and setting incense on fire, and you need 3 raven eyeballs or whatever to make it work. And it's like, no, I don't want to be part of that situation. At some point, you have to develop a new method for doing this that the browsers can support. I don't want to spend the rest of my life in this, back and forth battle with browsers about stuff. I mean, I think we all need to come together, and that's hopefully what W3C will do, though I would say as of right now, they're not close to getting there.
I agree with you to some extent. I think the experience has to be consented to, the value exchange has to be clear, right? We have lived on an implicit value exchange for too long. You're not asking for the right to use data, but you're using it anyway because you consider that the user gets access to the content and service and they're happy with it and they understand, in broad terms, right? I think we need to make that value exchange more explicit so that there's more control and the user can say, no, I don't agree with this situation. And so, we need to adapt the value proposition. But I don't think either we're going to go into full logged in, if you want anything, you got to give me your email address, you got to agree to everything. I think there will be nuances of gray, right? And so there is a world in which we have to deal with inferred identity, and we have to deal with things that are not necessarily users that are not explicitly authenticated, but that have agreed to some level of value exchange anyway. And so we need to make this work. Whether retargeting is the right use case for that or not, I don't know. I'm not certainly a big fan of retargeting. I know some brands are, and it works for them, and it drives business. And I think that's what we need to build them for them to be able to do. But yeah, it's not just a black and white. I think it's not just like fully anonymous or fully authenticated.
Yeah, I'm not saying logged in users are the only way. What I'm saying is a first party model controlled by publishers is the other way. But the way browsers are going to default is to anonymity. And I think we should spend time working through valid use cases, not trying to trick browsers with, with crazy schemes that are proprietary and patented by 6 different people and also all this other stuff.
I think that's a huge point. I think there's been too many things in the past that were not just snake oil, but just trying to take advantage and not actually solve the problem. And I think we have to actually solve the problem, which is get users' privacy and set up a value exchange that makes sense to everybody. I think like that's what we have to get towards. And I agree, like we don't know the right endpoint, but like that's what we have to get to rather than keeping tricking the system, which is every time we do it, it gets less and less effective and it will just go away.
And I can give you guys credit for this, Matthew, because I think ID5 has been very open about how your stuff works. And I've never seen like a bunch of black boxes and you say, you ask questions like, get away, we can't tell you the details because they're so secret. You guys, your story and your narrative is about collaboration and community and work and choices. And I think that's an important narrative for the industry to hear.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I do think, just to add to that, like the heritage you guys have of being a EU-based company is a good thing, because I think being able to deal with GDPR and that side of things, while there's a million problems with GDPR, does get your mindset in like the right way for what the go-forward world is going to look like, rather than this old way of thinking about things that's hard to get out of.
Yeah, and I think there's always a bit of a discrepancy for us, because we launched the company in 2017, 6 months before, 7 months before GDPR was an application. Everything we've built has been built in consent. And we don't have to think about it. We don't have to talk about it mostly in Europe, because that's like the default anyway. But we realized that when we engage with the tech lab on Project Rearc and whatever, we have to repeat those values. And I think Rearc is, its approach is kind of privacy first, consent based. Those are strong values. But I agree with you. It's not necessarily the default situation in some markets in the US in particular. But I think we're getting there, and I think it's that shouldn't be negotiable, right? That's like privacy first, user control, accountability, transparency. Yeah, it's got to be the way we rebuild identity for the industry, right? There's no way around it. We cannot continue to avoid. We're not continue not to have the user on the Lumascape. It should be in the middle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the first thing we try to ask whenever we're looking at any identity solution is, how does it work? And if you can't answer that question, we're not really interested in doing much more.
Yeah. Which is surprising how many people can't answer that question, because they don't know, or they literally can't tell you.
Yeah, that's why we're making it simple, right? So that we can't answer that question in 2 sentences. Right. So let's talk a bit about cohorts, because you kind of alluded to this. There's obviously the proposal that have been put forward by Chrome, which they're trying to make it very much like a consensual approach and everything, but it's very much the Chrome approach.
Well, to be clear, my view is there's no proposals. There's nothing on the table. It's a bunch of thoughts. There's a bunch of half-baked things. We're not even close to having a proposal that we could action on at this point. To be clear, the work is just starting. And anyone who says otherwise, I just don't agree with that.
They've come up with pretty good names, though. I think they've put a lot of efforts on the naming.
Yeah, well, welcome to Google land. That's what they do good jobs at, is naming stuff.
And Criteo as well. You got to give them credit, right? Finding something that spells sparrow.
Yeah.
Pretty good. We've tried on our side. We've got a Pleiad maybe. I don't know if that's good enough. I can send you the details of what that means later. What do you think of that? You were saying earlier, like, we'll have anonymous users that we'll have to treat as groups, and we'll have non-anonymous, identifiable users. Do you think there's a world in which we work with cohorts, fully with cohorts? Is that possible? Is that even competitive with what brands can do on Google and Facebook?
Oh, I think it's legit. Here's the thing. I think cohorts are mathematically attractive and politically horrific. So, and what I mean by that is mathematically, there's a lot of benefit into putting people into anonymized groups and using those anonymized groups, especially for attribution purposes, probably less so for targeting, but certainly for attribution purposes and things like that, and measurement. Yep. But right now, I don't see how this group of ne'er-do-wells come together to any level of consensus that's not ridiculous. So, and I'm not saying we're investing heavily in making this happen. We all want to make it happen. I think Google does too. Most people involved in the cohort discussions are trying to come up with a solution, but we're early days in this process. And, this is the kind of thing that, if you look at group efforts amongst the advertising industry and the internet community to come to consensus, your list is short. As that text, okay, success. Sellers JSON, okay, success. And then what's the third one? I don't know. I mean, it's like there's a lot of work that we need to do to come together to a community that's such a diverse set of representatives, including the privacy advocates, can all be comfortable with. So hopefully we can get there. Mathematically, there's a lot of attractiveness to cohorts and using anonymized groups, but the politics are, sometimes a little bit rough.
I also worry about like the user side of it. Like let's say we do figure it out, and 2 years from now you're user XYZ in whatever country in the world, and you see a retargeting ad, which TurtleDove allows for. You're never going to understand the mathematics behind the differential introduction of noise and the cohort creation and this, that, and the other thing to understand that your privacy was protected, but you still saw the ad for the shoes that you were on Zappos looking at, following you around the internet. Like, it doesn't jibe to some level, and I worry that no matter how mathematically sound it is, that the customer experience will still give this fear that privacy is being invaded. And who believes the nerds at the end of it? And I say that as a huge nerd myself, but like I just don't know if people are going to believe the nerds and their math.
Well, the good news is people don't understand the current system either, so we have that going for us. But
yeah, but we have a chance to we have a chance to involve them more in this value exchange, right? And I agree with you. If you go the route of the cohorts, you're kind of avoiding the problem altogether, and you're putting a lid on it and say, okay, forget about one-to-one interactions. We're just going to do some math in the background, and you're still going to get the annoying retargeting ads. But we can't be blamed for invading your privacy because we're not dealing with personal data. Well, somebody is, but like.
Hold on, Matthew. I mean, here's the thing that's really important. The anonymized ad experience is going to be worse than an anonymized ad experience. And if it's not, then we're idiots. I mean, if you choose anonymity, you will get more ads and they'll be less relevant. And if you choose or are affiliated with a site that gives you that does provide identity information in a secure way with the user's control, you'll get a more relevant ad experience. I think that's fine. I think there's just so much talk around trying to make them the same. It's like, no, I don't want that. I don't want them to be the same. I want them to be different.
No, I get that. I agree with you, and I don't think we'll get there, but know that we should. But I think the level of understanding of consumers, right? If we don't engage them into this value exchange, into this discussion around why you should accept that we target you with ad, why you should accept that we use an understanding of your behavior on the site to have a more relevant content proposition and ad proposition for you. If we don't get into this discussion, they'll still get the annoying ads through mathematical models and cohorts models and everything, but they won't be involved in the discussion. That's where I'm saying it's kind of it's not a real response to the problem, really. The problem is users don't want their privacy invaded, or they don't want things happening without their knowledge, right? They don't want to have the impression that we're spying on them. So we want to explain. We want to get them into, well, if you want to have access to that kind of, we want to, again, the value exchange is important, right? If you remove this part of the equation, you don't have to talk about the value exchange anymore, but they're still getting the same impression.
Well, I think there's two ways. There's a way of presenting to the user that says, if you want this content, you have to pay for it, and you have one way, my way. If you don't like my way, screw you. There's another way that says you have a choice. If you want, I have this Mercedes, you can get in it, you can drive it. If not, here's a skateboard. It's fine. You got to give the user the choice of what internet experience they want, and we haven't done a good job of doing that. The only time we've ever, as an industry, really talked to users about the value is in the ad blocking. When the ad blocking thing was happening in Europe, publishers figured out how to talk to their users, and it was somewhat successful because they convinced a lot of these users to whitelist the sites or turn off their ad blockers because you want access to the content. We've learned how to do that. And what I learned from that experience is that publishers are in a unique position to have that dialogue with their customers. And if they do that in a reasonable way, the user will have a choice. And I think that that's fine.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think that we have to keep the conversation simple as well. Because again, to pick on GDPR, I think as a user, when I'm in the EU and I see this pop up with potentially in the future 46 checkboxes and these companies I've never heard of, and what am I opting into? I don't know I don't understand the value of change at all. Whereas like in the ad blocking case, it's like, turn off your ad blocker to read the content. That makes a lot more sense to me. Like that's a very clear and simple description. So it's like, how do we make sure that these things actually make sense to consumers and are not a bunch of regulatory mumbo jumbo?
Yeah, 100%. And I think again that's a lot. Part of that responsibility is on the publisher to make this. I mean, the standards and the framework and everything in the back end must be simple enough. But like this discussion should be the discussion. It's back to the explicit value exchange I was talking about earlier, right? We need to have an explicit value exchange with customers, with users on the website, just because they need to understand if they're going to agree. If they're not interested, it's fine. They just click OK, accept, and we're good. But for the ones who are interested, the ones who care, it needs to be there. It needs to be in plain English or French or German or whatever. Yeah, that's the complexity of Europe, my friend. Right, we're almost at the. I don't believe this. We're almost at the end of our 45 minutes slot. What are you looking forward to? I mean, going out again and going to the movies and to the restaurants, of course. But like from an ad tech standpoint, from a pre-bid standpoint, from an identity standpoint, in the next few weeks, we're very focused on adoptions. We're looking for use cases. We're looking for more buyers, more sellers engaging and trying new things around identity. But from your standpoint, what's the focus? What are you planning to kind of work on in the next 6 months? What are you excited about?
For us, I mean, we're definitely, I agree with Tom that it's very early days on the privacy sandbox and the W3C process right now. We're pretty engaged in that and are interested in being a part of pushing that forward. And there are within that entire thing, there are some proposals that are very particularly interesting to us that we're spending a lot of time thinking about, but also trying as much as possible to talk to the other market participants, talking to the Criteo team in the case of Sparrow, talking to Tom's team and other teams across the industry about what are ways we can push this forward collectively and get the market to understand kind of what our needs are and say to Google in this case, these proposals are interesting, but they don't solve a lot of problems. How do we solve some of those problems moving forward and help to be a part of that? So I think it's really interesting because I do think, you usually aren't able to look 2 years out. And like now it's a unique opportunity to say, how do we rebuild all this stuff in a better way and be a part of making that happen is exciting and interesting to us.
Yeah, I would say that what we're really looking forward to in the next year is CTV and mobile and unifying these experiences across web, CTV, and mobile. And I think these identity conversations, while fascinating, are way too browser centric, and none of us are going to have a browser only life. Not a buyer, not an exchange, not a publisher. You're going to have to reach your users via video. You're going to have to reach your users via mobile devices and all these other things that are happening. And this experience, the last 6 weeks or however long it's been, has amplified that in my mind to a great degree. So we need to have identity solutions or targeting solutions or pricing and auction
attribution
that work across all of these things. Having 3 different systems for these 3 different types of media is completely stupid, and we need to get our act together and start talking about user experience holistically, because a user doesn't care that they're on different device, which device they're on. They're a wholly different person. That makes no sense. So if we're going to give users a good experience, we need to treat their digital life in a holistic manner. Yeah,
fully agree with you. I think, from our standpoint, right, where the problem we're having today is the browser ID problem, but the problem we're going to have tomorrow is how do we unify those logics? And CTV is a whole new it's a whole different ballgame in terms of identification issues. Mobile, when the ad ID goes away, same problem. So yes, that's well, hopefully not for the next 6 months because we've got our hands full with the web. But straight after that,
we're bad at dealing with tomorrow's problems in our industry. We're only good at dealing with today's short-term pain and then not looking ahead to the next problem. And then we're always flat-footed. So this is an opportunity. We see what's coming. And to the point you made earlier, Matthew, about third-party cookies are still here. We have to prepare for the future, and we're just horrific at that, it seems, sometimes in this industry.
Yeah, it's how do you say, pushing a rock up a hill, right? Mm-hmm. But I'm getting a lot of help from you guys, so we're good with this. Thank you very much for your participation. It was a great chat. It will be available in replay for everyone who's missed some of it. Really, thanks again for accepting, and have a great day. It looks super sunny in California, so enjoy it, Tom.
Yep,
and speak to you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. Thanks for setting this up. It's great.
Thanks for the invite. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.